Keep in touch with the home country because of the technology. Um, uh, it's easy to travel back and forth, so there's that opportunity to remain connected.
So we've been talking about a lot just now about being connected to your culture. This is
Right.
all under the umbrella of cultural retention.
Yes, 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 yes.
And you've written extensively on that.
Yeah, yeah. Cultural retention in terms of not only being able to practice one's culture, but also in terms of the foods people eat, the celebrations. So all these things are very, very vital. These hometown associations
Yes.
are very important in retaining aspects of the culture, and that's why the term transnationals is being applied to the new immigrants, transnational, because they live between two societies, if you will.
You worked with the East Indian diaspora.
For some
What sort of insights you gained from that experience?
Well, that was an interesting experience in that I actually did a little bit of research on mental health among East Indians, Guyanese East Indians. And I found that they are very group-oriented.
Okay.
Group-oriented. But I found that they tend to, the religion has a lot to do with their perception and their integration into society. They have to maintain religious values. But there's definitely a rift between the older East Indians, like other Indians, and the younger East Indians, who identify more with the American way of life. And I found that there was some friction.
Some friction.
Yeah.
What are some you can?
Well, in terms of discipline, for example, in terms of speech patterns.
Yes.
There's some of the younger immigrants who are embarrassed to take their friends home because maybe granny is in the home and she might be talking in the patois or whatever. There are many instances like that where the children are embarrassed to introduce their friends to their parents and grandparents. So
Cross-cultural adult learning. Tell us a little bit about that and whether it can work in most multicultural societies.
Cross-cultural adult learning, I think, is something that is very important in that many of the immigrants who come from places like the Caribbean come as adults. A large number of immigrants come from other countries. And I believe that it is important to whatever institutions they're attending to be sensitive to their culture, their belief systems, and so on, and use that understanding to help them to adjust to the various institutions and whatever they're learning.
We're going to take a quick break, but when we return, I want you to tell us why you wrote this book. You recently published and entitled English Caribbean Immigrants, Transnational Identities, how you came up with that title. But you tell us about it.
Sure.
All right. We are back with Professor Lear Matthews. Professor, your book entitled English Caribbean Immigrants, Transnational Identities. What? Why did you write that book?
Well, I've always had an interest in um, researching the life and experiences of immigrants, being an immigrant myself. And I observe the various dimensions of immigrant experience, including family adaptation, these organizations, as I said, hometown associations, adjustment, some of the problems that Caribbean children having in adjusting to the school system here, looking at the elderly and their experience, and this is really a neglected dimension of the immigrant experience. The experience of the elderly is chapter in that, and so I started writing several years ago when I was in graduate school, and I developed the various themes and the various chapters, and eventually I got to write a book. Now, my original plan was to be the sole author of the book, but as I began talking to colleagues from different parts of the Caribbean who are themselves immigrants, I realized that if I'm going to write a book on English-speaking Caribbean, and not exclusively on Guyana or Guyanese immigrants, it would be good to have representation from the different countries.
Yes.
So I invited folks, two writers from Jamaica, one from St. Kitts, another from Grenada, and the others are from Guyana. So the book has 10 chapters, 5 of which I wrote exclusively, and I co-authored one with Rose October, and the others were written. The other chapters were written by folks from other parts of the Caribbean, and so I really wanted to compile and document some of the experiences of English-speaking Caribbean immigrants, which was not being covered in some of the previous work. As I said, Aubrey Bonnet and others have done some work in this area, but a lot of the other work was being done by non-Caribbeans. And they were making some assumptions and drawing some conclusions that were sort of worrisome. So I wanted to do something from inside out. And so I decided to write this book. And so I began the book by defining this whole concept of transnationalism. In the 1970s, the word transnational was used as an economic term to talk about the economic relationship between developing countries and that kind of thing. But it soon evolved into describing immigrants, new immigrants, right? And as I said before, whose lives are influenced not only by their home country, but by the host society. So the concept of transnationalism, as a matter of fact, in the literature, a lot of the literature on immigrants, the immigrants are being referred to as transnationals. Exactly, because of that connection. And so I needed, I saw there were several aspects of English-speaking Caribbean lifestyle that was not being addressed. And so, so the book, as I said, the chapters deal with aspects, including things like the hometown associations, the elderly, the family, something called transnational parenting. This is the process whereby parents, because of the immigration laws over the years, when immigrants come to this country, sometimes for various reasons, the one parent may come to the United States first and leave the rest of the family home, and the other family members will probably join that parent later. And parents engage in something called transnational parenting. That has its own dynamics and its own issues and so on, whereby the parent might caring for the child by calling, internet, and so on. And the problems that can develop because the child or the children may be left with other relatives, and by the time they are reunited with the parents in the United States, the relationships can be strained. The child may be upset and not understanding why the parent had to leave the child in the Caribbean. The parent may begin to develop new relationships while before the child gets there.
Very true.
And it causes some conflictual
friction.
So all of those issues I observed, and I figured maybe we should put something together and really examine the experiences of English-speaking Caribbean immigrants.
So you have these different writers who focus on different aspects of it.
Exactly.
What were some, not surprising, but some, let's say surprising. I don't want to say alarming, but what are some very surprising revelations?
Or some of the interesting things.
Yes.
One of the things that I found among the elderly, for example, we take it for granted that our grandparents, it's okay for them to leave Guyana and to come be here with the family because they don't have anyone else at home. And the problem is that they are experiencing more trauma than we realize. Because they're here, it's difficult for them to be employed because of the age. Many of them are left at home for long periods of time. And that's one of the advantages is that the health care they get may be better than the Caribbean, so that's an advantage. But in terms of their psychological well-being, it's very, very difficult for them. And that caused some friction. And I didn't know it was that serious among the elderly. So this is an area that we have to, as immigrants, we have to definitely look at that more closely.
Immigrants, well, you mentioned transnationalism had an economic connotation in the 70s and so on. Immigrants are always remitting money. Dr. Bonet, when he was on the show, he spoke a lot about remittances.
Right.
Are immigrants obligated to develop their country of origin?
No, I wouldn't say they're obligated. But I think they have a desire to give back, because a lot of times in my research, when I talk to a lot of the persons involved in these hometown associations, they want to give back. You hear that often, but they're not obligated. One of the interesting findings in research too is that, let's say there is a village in which there are members of that village who are members of hometown associations, and the associations are sending remittances. Because the thing about remittances, in the past, the emphasis was on remittances exclusively or almost totally to family members and close friends.
Yes.
Right? Or these organizations may be involved in a little bit of charity work. But now they are doing very, very important development work, development of whole communities, development of various institutions. Right, so the role of these remittances and the whole process of remitting has broadened. The definition has really broadened. So that's important. So in answer to the question, no, I don't think people are obligated, but a sense of giving back is what's important for them, and they want to have a sense of continuity in their communities also, and that's important to them, whereby they're looking out for the younger generation. A lot of primary school and high school alumni associations. I mean, you'd be amazed how many high school alumni associations there are in North America. They focus on the children.
Yes. You lectured at the University of Guyana
for a couple of years.
Did you do any writings while you were there?
Writing? Yes. Well, as I said in our early conversation, I was a lecturer at the social science department, Department of Social Science, and we realized that one of the things that was happening is that the students didn't have enough local publications, with themes covering community issues and so on. And so a colleague of mine, Dr. Ken Dans, who was there at the time, we decided that we would put a monograph together. We call it a monograph. The book. And the title was Communities and Development, a Neglected Dimension of Nation Building. And we looked at the development, historical and contemporary structure and development of various communities, the African communities, the village communities, East Indian communities. And as I said earlier, we even included Jonestown as an advanced community in Guyana, and we talked about the politics involved in that. So that was my main focus, and I did some work on social welfare services in Guyana also, because a lot of my students were welfare officers, police officers, and that kind of thing, and prison officers. I was in the social work program, social work and sociology at the time.
What do you believe are some critical things to know about the adjustment of Caribbean immigrant children to the school system that many immigrants do not know?
Some of the research and some of my research that others have done, and some of my investigation, I found that there are adjustment problems relating to things like language, accent, the school system that's different, and the teachers are not as culturally sensitive, or I should use the term culturally competent.
Yes.
Because one can be sensitive without being competent in terms of how educational services are being provided. And one of the chapters that deal with cultural competence among providers of educational services, including teachers, counselors, social workers, and so on within the school system, focus on adjustment problems of children in the Caribbean children. And we found that the teachers are not really prepared in terms of being effective with children. I mean, they can teach the material, but teaching the material is not the only thing in terms of how children learn and develop. And for example, one of the things we found in the research is that in the Caribbean, our children are taught that it is important to listen, to be quiet and listen. We found that some of the teachers were misinterpreting that quietude as something psychologically wrong. And some of these children were being placed in English as a second language, some of the Caribbean children. They were being evaluated for psychological problems rather than them understand. Because here, the children are expected to be a bit more aggressive.
Yes.
This is quite different. So that was some of the problems we found.
That is interesting, eh?
Yeah.
Tell us a bit about your findings on the psychosocial impact of natural disasters, mental health, and crime in the Caribbean. Well, we touched on crime in the Caribbean before. Well, let's just focus on natural disasters.
Right. Well, by natural disasters, we're talking about things like flooding,
yes,
storms, earthquakes, and that kind of thing, which